Hi everyone. Before we get started on our next talk, Lessons in Ethical Development I Learned from Star Wars, will be presented by Jamie. So I'm going to introduce Jamie before we start. Jamie is a non-binary adventurer from Buffalo, New York, who wishes they were immortals so they'd have time to visit every coffee shop in the world. I completely agree. They're a Rails and Android developer doing both front-end and back-end work, and currently working as an engineer for Agilist, a data analysis platform for indoor agriculture. In their free time, they do advocacy in the transgender community, make podcasts and designs, and spend time in nature, camping, and hiking. So please give your attention to Jamie.
Hi, thank you very much for coming to my talk so I can talk about Star Wars, my favorite thing to do. She just introduced me pretty good. This is my introduction. My name is Jameson. You can call me Jamie. That's short for Jameson. I'm here from Buffalo, New York, which is the home of bad sports. And I'm really excited to be in Chicago. It's my first time since I was like a little kid, so thank you to Mondo for having me here. As she said, I work for Agilist. We do farm management, data analysis for indoor farms and greenhouses. And also, you can follow me on Twitter at JamieBash. Feel free to tweet me. The only thing I ask is that I do use, my pronouns are they, so if you live tweet or anything during my talk, just keep that in mind. And now that we're all really good friends, there's one other really important thing you need to know about me, and that's that I love Star Wars. It's my favorite thing. I love it very much. And I love talking about it, and I think about it a lot. But it's also changed the way that I think about my career in certain ways and the morality of being a developer. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. And specifically, I want to talk about it in the context of Rogue One. I was really excited to see Rogue One as someone who loves Star Wars. And I went to see it on the first day, and I was really pumped. I went with my fiance, and then we came home after it was over, and he was like, so how did you like Rogue One? And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my career? I need to rethink everything. And he was like, this is what you want to talk about after Rogue One? Like the first thing, I'm like, yes. Because I was so excited. Like I saw the previews, and there was this group of rebels, and they were mostly marginalized people, and I was like, yes, yes, these are my people, yes. I'm gonna go see this movie, and they're fighting the Empire, they're fighting a man, and I'm gonna relate to them, it's gonna be amazing. And that's not what happened. I went to see Rogue One, and the characters that I related to specifically were like Empire characters, and I was like, oh no, how did that happen? This is much closer to my career path. So I want to talk about how I came to that realization. But first I feel like I have to talk about kind of good and evil in general. Because Star Wars is a pretty classic story of good and evil. And at first glance, maybe there's not really a lot of room for gray area. Like if you've never seen Star Wars and you look at this picture, like, okay, well here are the good guys and there are the bad guys. It's pretty obvious who is good and who is bad. And that kind of made me feel like, all right, well great, I'm not a bad guy. So, of course, I'm not going to do any bad things, so no worries, I'm done on that. But somewhere along the line, I started to realize that it wasn't so simple. And this is a series of tweets that I saw in November, not too long after the election, which was a time when a lot of people were thinking about ethics, I think. And I'm going to read a couple of them from Kate Crawford, someone I really respect. We need to talk about ethics more, because developers will be asked to do some seriously awful things. Will you build the Muslim registry, or work on locating undocumented workers, or deploy facial recognition to identify protesters? The technical community, and the Valley in particular, has a responsibility to say what they will stand for and what they won't stand for. And so that got me starting to think that maybe it wasn't so black and white, that I'm not a bad guy and I won't do bad things ever. And actually, as I started thinking about that with Star Wars, maybe it's not so black and white even there. Because, you know, back to this picture, but this guy here, Darth Vader, pretty famous guy, actually he was originally this guy, Anakin Skywalker, who was, you know, a war hero for many years with the good guys in the Clone Wars. And the more I thought about it, it turns out almost all the villains in Star Wars were originally good guys. who accidentally became villains somewhere along the line because of the temptation of the dark side. You know, they were tricked by the dark side in a way, because people are pretty easy to trick. And Count Dooku used to be a Jedi. Here he is with Obi-Wan hanging out. Kylo Ren from the new movies, you know, we know who his parents were. He was going to be a good guy. He was training with Luke Skywalker, and somewhere along the line that went wrong. And it's not just bad guys either. You know, it's not just, okay, you're a Jedi, well, you're a good guy, you're good, you don't have to worry ever again. Everybody faces temptation in Star Wars. Even the good guys who stay good face temptation. Luke Skywalker had to, you know, face the temptation of his father wanting to rule the galaxy with him. That's pretty tempting. Rey in The Force Awakens had just found out that she had Force powers, and then Kylo Ren offered to train her. If I just found out I had Force powers like yesterday, and then someone offered to train me, I would be like, that would be very tempting. I would be on that. And when I said I'm like really a big Star Wars nerd, like I wasn't kidding. So Obi-Wan in the cartoons had a lot of temptation. Ezra Bridger from Star Wars Rebels has a whole arc about the dark side and the Sith holocron. Even Master Yoda faces trials. And if Master Yoda has to worry about this, then we all have to worry about it. But again, I specifically wanted to talk about Rogue One because that was what made me make like a big realization. And again, because I'm huge Star Wars trash, I had read this novel, Catalyst, which was the prequel to Rogue One. And it focuses specifically on these two characters. Hopefully I'm not like super spoiling Rogue One for everyone. It's been out for like almost a year, so hopefully some people have seen Rogue One. They get the Death Star planes in the end, spoiler. But this is Orson Krennic in the white, and he is the director of the Advanced Weapons Research, so you can tell that he's a bad guy because he's wearing a white cape. And then this is Galen Erso, and he was the lead engineer on the Death Star project. And Catalyst is a book about these two. They know each other from college, and Galen was like a known pacifist. He refused to work for the government, even as most of his colleagues were going to work for the government. But Krennic knew that he was going to need him for this project, because Galen was like the lead authority on crystallography, and that's kyber crystals power the Jedi's lightsabers, also power the Death Star. And Krennic also knew that it was Galen's dream to work on renewable energy for Outer Rim planets. So he kind of manipulated him over the years with promises about being able to do that, told him a lot of horror stories about the Clone Wars, which were going on at this point, and promised him that his research could help end these horrible like wars and atrocities. So Galen ended up working on Project Celestial Power, but he didn't know how his work was being implemented at first, for several years into it. And this is a quote from the book. This is from Galen's mentor, who was trying to urge him to come work with her on this project, and she said, "The war has altered everything, not only for those directly involved in the conflict, but also for many of us here in Coruscant. Count Dooku shook us awake to a harsh reality, and most of us have traded theory for practicality. Even so, unlimited funding has been wonderful for research. In due time, we'll return to our dream of providing renewable energy on developing worlds, and then we'll be able to accomplish much more than we ever could have before." So I was reading this book, and I was like, oh man, that sounds so good. Like, who wouldn't want to take this job? I'm like reading the book, getting frustrated. I'm like, why doesn't he want to take this job? And then I'm like, oh my God, this is the Death Star project. Like, I even knew it was the Death Star project because I knew I was reading a book about the Death Star, and I still got tricked into working on it. And so that was what made me kind of reconsider. Like, okay, well, if someone tells me about a really good job, maybe I have to think a little bit harder about what it is. Because the time to realize that the thing you made is horrible isn't after you've already made it. It's not just in fiction that this happens. We're talking about fiction now, but this slide is called "Woe is Me," because that's a quote from Einstein that he said after he heard about the bombing of Hiroshima. He didn't actually work on the atomic bomb directly, but his research was used for it, and he supported his research being used for that because he was worried that the Germans would develop the bomb first. And later he said, "Had I known the Germans would not succeed in producing an atomic bomb, I never would have lifted a finger." And he was very regretful about his involvement with that. But fiction is less depressing, so we're going to talk more about Star Wars. All of this got me thinking a lot about myself and about my moral code. I don't really want to talk about my moral code specifically. I'd rather talk about your moral code, because this is something that's personal and it's different for everybody. We all have to draw our own line in the sand, both in our regular lives and how it relates to our work. This is like my favorite clip art ever. I don't know what this man is doing. But I used to think that my work was kind of unrelated to morality, which is kind of a dangerous way to think, because we inject our own way of thinking into pretty much everything we do in a lot of different ways. And if you separate your morals and your work too much in your mind, like I used to, maybe if you're faced with a moral dilemma at work, it might be harder to realize that it's a moral dilemma and not just a work dilemma. Inevitably, I have to make a joke about how Anakin Skywalker can't draw a line in the sand because he hates sand. And once you decide on your moral code, you have to implement some accountability to yourself. The moment that you're faced with an ethical dilemma isn't really the best time to start thinking about where your line is. That makes it too easy to be like, yeah, this is a great opportunity, why not do that? Like I did with the Death Star project. You got to think about these things before they happen to you in order to be prepared for those questions. Don't feel obligated to make big decisions immediately either. I mean, that's pretty much true of any big decision in your life. Taking time to think it over is always okay. And if there are people who don't want to give you that time to consider, I would reconsider whether I want to trust those people. You know, maybe you have to think about if it's your boss who's the one who doesn't have a moral code. And that could be a pretty scary realization. And write things down. You know, when you're thinking about your moral code, it's okay to take notes. If I'm faced with a decision suddenly, it's probably not at a moment where I'm already deep in thought about ethics. So I find it helpful to look back on my thoughts from a time when I was deep in thought about ethics. I mean, at the basis, holding yourself accountable just means not doing bad stuff. And that means really any bad stuff, and you gotta think about that, like not even jokes. This is something I made about a year ago. And I thought this was really funny, and I posted it on the internet. And that's not actually the first 3 letters of my mother's maiden name or my social security number, because I'm not stupid. But I ended up taking it down, because I realized that if even one person didn't realize this was a joke and kind of fell for it, and then they actually got their identity stolen, that would kind of be on me and my conscience. So my self-accountability forced me to take this down, but I'm still including it in my slides because we only have so much self-control. And repurpose code is a big part of this too. You know, once you decide what's important to you, you've got to think about what other technologies are similar enough that your code could be reused for them. My favorite example about this is, I talked briefly about facial recognition earlier to arrest protesters. So if you were offered a job writing facial recognition to arrest protesters, you might say, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, that's immoral. I'm against that. I'm not going to write that code. And I think that's a pretty good decision. But if that's really important to you, then maybe you also shouldn't take a job writing, facial recognition for AR video games. Because maybe they could take your AR video games code and use it for something you don't agree with. I do want to note, this is kind of based on how important it is to you personally. I've had people come up to me before, after I've talked about this, and say that they didn't think this was a good example, because maybe it wasn't reasonable to pull video games completely off the table because of this. Personally, I disagree. But if you've considered the implications and you've decided that it's not important enough to you to turn down, I'm not here to try to change your mind about this example in particular. But I do think it's important that you should think it all the way through first, and when you decide to do it, you make an informed decision about what you're getting into. Incidentally, this is literally exactly what happened to Galen Erso Catalyst. I don't think he would have signed up for this project if he had known what they were going to use it for in the end. In fact, I know that he wouldn't have. If you can't beat them, join them is kind of an attractive mentality, I think. There's definitely something attractive about the idea of getting in with the people that might oppress you, and then they oppress someone else instead of you, and then you're safe. Especially if you're scared, it might feel safer to succumb to pressure to do things that you don't feel comfortable with. I think this is especially true for marginalized people because there's a huge pressure to be one of the good ones in the eyes of the majority and maybe be willing to throw other marginalized people under the bus. I do want to say, I know that real life can be a lot messier than it is on my slides. Sometimes marginalized people have to do stuff like this for their own safety. I totally understand that. I'm not here to like guilt trip minorities and into putting themselves at risk or in danger or like quitting their job if they don't have that luxury. But, you know, if you're in a situation where you're considering what to do, I think this is an important thing to consider. An unethical organization, you know, like the Empire, they only care about you as long as you're useful. You know, not only is it unethical maybe to put yourself in a position where you can oppress others to save yourself, but like that doesn't suddenly make your oppressors care about you. Like they don't care about you, they only care about what you're doing for them. And this is also like Rogue One. I related to Director Krennic in a lot of ways that made me feel kind of uncomfortable, but I mean, he was really ambitious, and I'm pretty ambitious. He did a lot of networking. I love networking, I think I'm pretty good at it. He just knew a lot of people, and he knew who to make connections between. These are things I pride myself on personally. So I kind of understood in a way where he was coming from. You know, Orson Krennic worked really hard to gain favor within the Empire for his entire life. He even succeeded in building the Death Star for them. But then they just took what he had built and let him be destroyed. He spent his entire life being the villain, hoping that it would help him get ahead. And what did he get at the end? Absolutely nothing. So what's my conclusion about this? Well, I hope it's not too anticlimactic, but I don't have all the answers. There's not like a single line that I can point out and say, nobody should ever cross this line. You know, we all have to decide for ourselves what's important to us and determine where that line is for each of us personally. But I would urge you to make a conscious decision about that and then commit to sticking to your own principles on it. My hope is that if we all think about it and do that, then we won't end up building another Death Star. Thank you for listening. Again, I'm Jamie Bash on Twitter. This is my website. I write articles about Star Wars and ethics. I have one called How Rogue One Taught Me Not to Be a Bad Guy, which is pretty much the article version of this talk. And then I have a follow-up called, I think it's called How to Defect from the Empire and Other Unethical Jobs, that goes into more detail. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Thank you very much.
Jamie. We can now move into Q&A. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask right now, you can ask them. Oh, you got one.
Medical professionals take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, something similar. What do you think about computer science professionals having a similar professional code or oath that they take?
That's a really interesting thought. I hadn't thought too much about it. I like the idea in theory. I think that we should all strive to do no harm as much as we can. I think it gets a little bit complicated just because that might mean different things to different people. And I don't totally feel comfortable telling people like this is what's moral and this is what's not, and that's what I try not to do. My worry is less about people that are like doing bad things on purpose, because I don't think I'm going to stop those people from doing bad things. But I think there's a lot of people that aren't inherently bad people who may just do bad things out of carelessness or because they haven't thought it through all the way. And that's what I really like to talk about and try to help it from that angle, somewhere where I think I can actually, you know, convince somebody. You know what I mean?
Any other questions? Feel free to ask Jamie questions also after the session.
Thank you for letting me talk about Star Wars. If you want to talk more about Star Wars, I'll be happy to do that later.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
So, is there a scenario that you can share with us where you've had to think it through in your, professional career and make a decision like that?
I really haven't. I've been lucky. I think that's why I had such a crashing realization when I first started thinking about this. I've been really lucky to work on a lot of projects that I think are really actually good for the world. I think that's partially because I've sought out jobs like that, and partially just because I've been really privileged to fall into jobs like that. And when I saw Rogue One and I started thinking about this, I kind of realized, like, oh my God, I've never thought about this before ever, and that was what was really scary to me. So I feel really lucky that I haven't had to deal with that, and I'm glad that I hit this kind of realization early enough in my career before I've had to make a decision like that, because I'm afraid I would have made the wrong decision. But now I feel like I would make the right decision.
Thank you.